Hey, it's Munwara Ali here, live again, once again, coming to you with a culture conversation, and I have a different guest today. Why culture? So, a little bit about myself. I am a mentor, a coach, and I'm hugely passionate about leadership. And I'm also a CEO of a small charity in East London. Apart from that, I'm also a director of a CIC, and I do quite a lot of international development work. So I started these culture conversations on LinkedIn Live and also on my YouTube channel, purely because there's a lot of perspectives around cultures, and I think there's a lot to be learned from cultures. Being in a leadership role within a charity, it's been a long journey for me, a learning journey, but I do firmly believe, based on conversations I've had with several guests over the last few weeks. So my conversation started with Juliet, who talked about the connection of food and love. That was something that Kate emphasized the importance of, whether it's within the workplace or within the home, how we communicate or culture around food says a lot about how we express love. Then I had a wonderful conversation as well with Catherine Reed. And Catherine is somebody who has so much information around so many cultures, where she's traveled, I think, about 150 different countries as part of her work in international expansion. And following that, I had a wonderful conversation with Lola. And Lola specializes, she's a strategist around leadership and culture, equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So it's been really, really interesting finding out from these women. I also delved deeply into personal lived experience and the identity that we form based on all the different cultural elements and influence in our own lives with Gula. So Gula talked about two different cultures that had a huge influence on her growing up. And I believe that today's guest is going to give us a lot of insight into culture within the home, something that we kind of really differentiate. We don't talk about in relation to business and the workplace, but culture is just the way we do things, right? That's what everybody says. So how we do things is going to vary from home to home, just like it varies from business to business. So my lovely guest today is Ivy, and she is a teacher, a coach, and a mentor. And I am really privileged to have her here today with me. And I hope that we will be able to entertain you and provide some insight. If you have any comments, wherever you're joining from, please do give us some feedback. And also, if you have any questions for Ivy or myself, that would be wonderful. Just going to invite Ivy in. Hi.
Hello, Monuara, and hello everyone else who's watching or who's going to watch later. It's a pleasure.
Lovely, lovely. And one of the things I said to you is, how do you feel about spontaneous?
Can you remember what I said?
Yeah, yeah. Go on then, Ivy. Introduce yourself, my lovely, in your own words.
Okay, so my name is Ivy, and first off, I'm a mum because I like to bring that side of me. I am a mum. I'm also a chemistry teacher. I'm passionate about science, by the way. It doesn't always come through, but I am a chemistry teacher and I'm passionate about science. My teaching experience spans from children from the ages of perhaps one right through till 18. So my comfort zone is amongst the ages of 10 to 18. That is where my comfort lies, to be honest. I am also a coach and a mentor. I am the CEO and founder of Eden Step CIC. Eden Step CIC is a community interest company with aims to support parents and children and young people to raise their aspirations just in a bit to help them to kind of go for better outcomes such as in career, in education, in well-being, in also social integration. So that is who I am in a nutshell.
Thank you, thank you. And I love what you've done with founding Eden Steps, because obviously the whole idea, and when I was following you and some of the work that you were sharing on LinkedIn, it became very obvious to me that's where your passion lies, because that is you giving back in so many ways. So yes, really wonderful to have you here today. I just want you to share, you know, in terms of teaching and the connection of culture, like you said, your mom first. Tell me a bit about that. As a teacher, what do you notice?
Tell you what, it's interesting to kind of sit back as a teacher or stand back. We don't get to sit down very often in a classroom because you know what it's like. It's busy people, busy students as well. But it's interesting to just stand back and look at the different students, because the school, or most of the schools that I've worked at, draw students from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds as well, different countries. Um, and the school that I'm working at the moment is very international, which draws students from Asia, Africa, the US, and also Europe. And so it's interesting to stand back and just look at the different nuances that you can see in the first, the behaviors, the attitudes, how the students will approach things, based off of, and you can see that based off of maybe their cultural background, maybe their parental heritage as well. It's really interesting to see that in the classroom. But also coming home, I grew up fundamentally in Cameroon. Most of my years I grew up in Cameroon, which is in the west of Africa. And
Mhm.
moving to the UK, by the time I moved to the UK, I was already an adult. And so I taught in Cameroon and I've been teaching in the UK. And there's a massive difference there in terms of how students will approach education back in Cameroon, where parents had to pay school fees for children, parents had to buy books, as opposed to in the UK, where if it's a state school, then it's state funded and parents do not have to pay school fees. And therefore, the cultures around these two different communities is very different in terms of how they approach education, how their motivation, how their drive is towards learning.
That's really interesting, especially the differences that you talk about between the two countries and the education systems, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then having diverse, group of students to work with gives you massive insight. Have you found that it's sometimes quite difficult in terms of the school's ethos or the school's culture? I mean, I'm not talking about the school you're working in now, but
Mm,
like the previous schools maybe in the past that you've
yeah.
in. How do you feel like, in terms of, everyone talks about EDI, but what does it really mean in reality?
Yeah. I think the EDI at the moment is quite buzzing in many organizations and institutions and schools as well. But I've been teaching for a long time, for 20 years now. And it wasn't the case when I started teaching. And even when I started teaching in the UK, it wasn't the case in 2010 and 2011. But as the years have gone by, I think what has happened in schools in general is many people have started, educating themselves, especially after the sad passing of George Floyd.
Mm,
Many schools embraced EDI and just started to understand what different cultural heritage and backgrounds, the nuances that come as a result of coming from, say, maybe a black ethnic background as opposed to a white British background or Asian. That is starting to come more into schools at the moment. I think more could be done in terms of understanding those nuances. And I think more could be done by actually inviting in these different cultural these different people from different cultures, and understanding that it could be over a meal, it could be over, a conversation that has food. I'm a huge fan of, bringing people together using food, to be honest. I love food. So um I have seen that schools have improved. There's still more to do, in terms of understanding. But also, the one thing that I have noticed within schools, not necessarily at the school that I work at the moment, but throughout working in the UK, is that there are certain characteristics and nuances that are associated to certain groups of students from different backgrounds. And whilst it might not be the best thing to stereotype a child based on where they come from or their background, I do find that these stereotypes still play a role in whether students are put in different sets, or whether students are, whether students are treated in one way or another. And they still have a role to play, and it's a shame that in 2023 they still do, because children are children fundamentally.
Oh wow, that just brings back memories for me, because in the 80s, in the 90s, when I was a student at secondary school, Bangladeshis were underachievers.
Mm.
So I was told, I'll only end up repeating my GCSE English and maths,
Oh.
and I'm not going to go very far. And I know that the sets I was put in, but I always felt like with a lot of the girls in my class, I went to an all girls school. A lot
Hmm.
of the girls that came to my class came from Bangladesh,
Okay.
and they came like as teenagers. So I felt like I was already ahead, but I
Yes.
was put in that group, and most of the times what I was doing was mentoring them. I never got my own work done. I never achieved in terms of, like, I never progressed as much as I could have, but
Yeah.
I still did better than what they predicted. But the
That's
point is
great.
that point about putting people, like, I'm not your average Bangladeshi woman,
Yeah.
because you can put me amongst so many other people, but there's a very heavy percentage of me that feels I'm British.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's absolutely appalling that the school did that at, in the 80s. And it's absolutely appalling that, it still happens. Many schools have done a lot of work to eradicate things like that, but I know that it still happens, based off of people's backgrounds and all of that. And it's sad because it already builds a ceiling for the student, even without allowing them to thrive. It's demotivating, but also it really rips off the student's self-esteem. And if my self-esteem is already low, I might as well not even try.
Mhm. Yes, I hear that. Hi, Gula. Gula says I'm here. And Joy,
Hello, Gula.
Joy as well. Hello. Thank
Hi,
you for
Joy.
joining us. Yeah, it's quite a difficult one, because, as you know, I keep on saying via various content that I share online,
Mm,
that everything rises and falls with leadership.
absolutely.
And leadership will sometimes find that the solution is to bring in an external consultant, and the consultant will produce a report which then gets left on a shelf. And the resources, sometimes it's not even the resources or the capacity. I think sometimes people just, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know how to implement it,
Yeah.
therefore. So you really need to get some sort of troubleshooting in place. And especially hearing about the head teacher recently who
Mm,
committed suicide,
yeah.
it just made me think about, like, I know it's not easy at the leadership level, but
Mm.
I also know that there are a lot of women out there that could be great leaders, and exactly for those reasons, they are afraid to step up.
Hmm. I do agree. I empathize with leaders, and I know that, being the head, wearing the crown, it's not the easiest place to be, because everyone looks up to you. Everyone, the expectations that you're going to do well are quite high, and we're only humans. And I suppose when it comes to, like, um when it just comes back to cultural, awareness, I believe in conversation, open and honest conversation, not just talking, but open and honest conversation. And most leaders, I believe, especially going back to schools, they don't, like you said, they don't know what they don't know.
Mm,
And sometimes bringing that topic up, or bringing such topics up, are not usually quite easy to bring to talk about. People have their own, their own experiences. They have their own things, that experiences outside of that workplace, that might also stop them from having those open and honest conversations. But I suppose we're at an age where they are encouraged,
mm,
and sometimes it just takes a leader saying, I am not quite sure, I don't understand, and I'm seeking to understand, to then use that to create the change that they want to create. Because what I often find is they'll bring in an external person to do some training on
mm,
something, for example. And as soon as that training, to be honest, in schools, teachers are incredibly busy, that even sometimes a lunchtime or a break time is getting that whole break time or lunchtime is a struggle. So if I sit in a training for an hour, maybe at the end of the day, maybe 4 p.m., 5 p.m., it's practically impossible for me to implement that training with all of the other things that I have to do. And I have that head teacher in mind, because I was just reading a report the other day, and it was kind of geared towards Ofsted or whatever. So with inspections and all of that, there's a lot of pressure to actually really implement the well-meaning training that was done. And so it just stays on the shelf.
mm, mm. Yeah. Um, okay. So we've been talking about schools. Let's
Yeah.
get into the complexity of the home.
Great. Brilliant.
So, okay, where should we start? So, like, a lot of parents need support, similar to, I think, in my opinion, the one role, the biggest leadership role is the parent role.
Absolutely. I do agree.
And people don't even realize, and that brings back to something that I heard Simon Sinek say,
Mm,
that most leaders don't even know the game they're in. So most parents, because listen, we don't know how to be a parent. We
mm,
don't get, and even if you read books, there's no manual that will tell you exactly how. The only influence is the education we've had, the experiences, and watching. Like they say, children do as you do, watching
mhm.
our parents.
Yeah.
So how do you, how do you broach this, or how do you feel like within the work environment, working with parents? What How do you overcome that?
It's a tough one. It is a tough one, always working with parents and understanding. First of all, the moment that I call a parent, it's either your child has been amazing, and I just wanted to tell you that they have done this, that, and the other really well, or it's not a very good conversation. I will call and say, I'm afraid that so and so has maybe not done really well, or not reached their target, or this has happened and that has happened. And sometimes the parents are very open and receptive, and sometimes they are not. Um, when it's a positive, they are always very open and receptive. But when it's not a positive, you do find that some parents are open and receptive and others aren't. But then I suppose dealing with parents is quite, it's also nuanced, because sometimes the parents themselves don't know better. And it's sad to say, but sometimes the parents themselves don't know better. And so it's not just educating that child, but it's then educating the parent to work in partnership with me, so that we can educate their child, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely, because you can't work with a child in isolation.
Absolutely, yeah. So sometimes that has to be done. Sometimes I call a parent, and instead of talking about the child, we then talk about how the parent can support the child. And then before we even start talking about, okay, so what are the child's needs? How then can we support you to support the child? For example, one of my students, they were underachieving, not because they did not know how to revise. They just did not revise, and they did not know how to. They did not want to revise, did not know how to, felt overwhelmed. And so I called the parent. And after calling the parent, I said, look, I'm going to be really honest. If they carry on working at the rate at which they are working at the moment, it's not going to be good news in the summer term. And so the parent asked me, so what is the issue here? They are not revising. Why are they not revising? Is it overwhelmed? What is it? And upon closer conversations, we found out that it's not that the student does not want to revise, but they are overwhelmed and they don't even know how to. Parents do not also know how to support the student to revise. So I had to support parents on revision techniques and ways to revise to then support student. And so it's I suppose it also depends on the parents' own experiences when they were children. So it's some sort of a generational thing, Monwara. It's not
Yes,
it's not
yes,
just
I
me
hear.
dealing with students, but it's me dealing with students, supporting parents to support students, but also trying to, I think it's almost a mindset thing. What
you.
experiences shaped that parent when they were growing up? And how are those experiences stopping them from helping their child to become the best student that they can be? And then working with that to move the child forward.
And that's really powerful because I don't think people realize when you, and this is why I think mentoring is hard work. You really have to be passionate to be a mentor. And when
Yeah.
people try and suggest it should be free,
Mm,
it's hard work, but it's like you have to do the mentoring and provide that support in order to make the ripple effect and make sure you get the ultimate outcome that you want. You know, I'm working with women that are in leadership roles,
mm.
and they are in denial that they need help, right? So you can imagine. I don't think it's any different with parents. It's so
It's
much
not.
harder.
It isn't. And the thing with parents is there's this shame around the fact that I'm a parent and I don't know what to do. There shouldn't be. But
No,
most parents feel shame that they are not quite sure what to do at this particular instant. Most parents feel shame that they lost the plot and shouted at their kids, or and used a few expletives and all of that. But at the end of the day, each parent is doing the best that they can with the resources that they have at that point in time. If they do not have the right resources, they can only parent to the extent of which their resources would take them. So I do respect parenting and parents quite a lot because it's a hard job. No manual.
no, exactly. It's such
Yeah.
a important and difficult job. And you know what you said around shame, that really rings a bell because also if we realize and accept that everybody is different, it means you can't parent two children in the same way. Now, I say this from personal experience. I have a boy and a girl.
Mm,
And although they're 18 and 23, they're very different. They're worlds apart.
yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize I couldn't use the same strategy, revision techniques that I used with my son. And I also had a sister, a little sister that I looked after.
Mm,
And her and my son were only 2.5 years apart. So, what worked for both of them, the techniques didn't work for my daughter.
yeah.
She was the rebel, and she was like, don't tell me what to do. I know I am doing it, mom. I'm doing this.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show that, like, you can't, as a parent, you do. And my parenting was very, very different to my parents
Yes.
parenting towards me, because my father wouldn't didn't even know the difference between various different qualifications, right?
Mm,
And I was the first in my family to go to university. So it was like a big change for my family. But I had to develop those, techniques. I remember writing on big pieces of paper
Yeah.
and bullet points, and then sticking them on the ceiling so I could read it before I went to bed and read it when I woke up, because I used to find my head full of too much.
Yes.
Our family and the household had so much going on. I
Mm.
think within Asian households as well, like during Ramadan, you're busy, there's cooking, there's guests, and there's all these additional cultural festivities that you have to be a part of. And
Yes.
then your revision becomes like secondary, it's not like a priority.
Mm.
And so I had to find ways to do it that would
Um,
work for me. And
yeah.
I used to do that. And my sister, when I shared that with her, she used a similar technique. Whereas with Mehek, my daughter, no, she had her own ways and she had her own ideas. So yeah, I think parenting is very hard, and no one way works for all your children because they're all
Absolutely.
very different.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's nuanced because it's different for boys and girls, and it's different for even within the same, like I have two sons and they are completely different. um my older son, very laid back, likes to take his time with stuff. My younger son, very on time, wakes up at 6 a.m. every morning, ready for school, ready to go, whilst my older son is still in bed. And there's no right or wrong way of parenting. Um I'm just going to share something that I did in a parenting workshop over the weekend. I i talked about stages of maturity parenting, so kind of crafting our parenting styles based on the stages of maturity of the child, not on the age, because children do not mature as per age. You would find that when it comes to maybe 10, 11-year olds, girls are more mature generally than boys, but the boys do catch up as they grow older. So I was just talking about three levels of maturity. The first level is where they're yelling, they're throwing tantrums and all of that. And there's a different parenting style for that type of a child and for that level. The second level is when they're doing their chores, but they need constant reminders. From time to time, they still fight back, they still throw a tantrum, they still argue back. There is also a different way of parenting a child who falls in that level of maturity. And then the third level is where they are mature, they would even work and pay their bills. You know, we can only, we can only dream. And this type of a child, you would parent them differently as well. So depending on the stage of maturity of that child, you would have to adapt your parenting style to suit that child, to either give and take control depending on how mature they are and how responsible they are with the control that you're giving and taking from them.
Wow, that's like massively insightful. You have to share, Ivy, more about your workshops and how people can participate, because I can imagine like that's really powerful to know. My personal experience, I learned the hard way. I learned, especially with my youngest,
Hmm.
what would work and wouldn't work with her after like all the tantrums and everything else.
Yes.
And I thought like I was very clued up. I've been a youth worker from age 17. I know, but I, discovered that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I still don't know. I'm still learning. And I think that's
Yeah.
the thing. You won't get people in leadership roles willingly admit that they don't know.
Hmm.
They don't have the answers. But the reality is we're not the same people we were 10 years ago,
No,
right?
absolutely not. We're not the same person from yesterday, even.
Yeah,
So,
true,
what
true.
about 10 years ago?
True. I'm more relaxed today than I was yesterday, I'll be honest. I was thinking about, okay, there's XYZ things I need to sort out.
Yeah.
So yeah, totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So in terms of like what works in the home and what doesn't, I mean, I'm just looking at the parallels to the work environment,
Yes.
where every staff member, if you are in a leadership role and you're managing a team, every staff member is going to be different and is going to have different needs. And
Mm.
it's the same analogy, isn't it?
Everywhere is the same. In the classroom, in the home, everywhere. It is the same. I suppose that is equity, isn't it?
Mhm.
It is trying to be equitable. It's not equality,
No.
because equity is completely different from equality. It's trying to be equitable because you're providing based off of people's needs rather than just providing because you want to provide. Yeah,
And that's a very important distinction to make because people's needs are going to be different.
absolutely.
And I guess with the bigger organizations, this is why it gets difficult because when you're a very small organization, you can personalize and meet needs.
Mm,
And as the numbers grow, it becomes much, much more harder. And this is why schools have the problems that they have because they
yes.
are huge institutions.
Mm,
And then that whole view about, okay, if we bring training in, we need to make sure everyone has access to the same training. But actually, not everybody needs the same training.
no, no. Because you cannot bundle people up. People have different experiences even before joining that organization. They might have had the same training and they might have even had the same trainer in their previous organization before joining. So I still go back to that open conversation about, okay, what are our training needs as a body, not just as individuals, but also as a body. What are our training needs?
You said something earlier about being honest and having honest conversations.
Hmm,
I think that's so powerful in a leadership role because I find I've worked with so many women in particular where they haven't quite been comfortable having honest conversations. People don't always want to rock the boat. In
no.
fact, I was talking to someone last week
Hmm,
where they were managing somebody who they felt had like a quite high mental health needs, and they just didn't have the courage to bring up conversation with this
wow.
individual because of it. And
Hmm,
I think that it can be really, really hard. And that's why having people within organizations who actually have this right skill set. Is it a
yes.
skill set thing, or is it just generally people need to be encouraged to be honest and open more? Because I can almost imagine someone not, I guess, being as responsive to me, being honest with them if I didn't have a relationship with them or they
Yeah,
were comfortable.
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. The person has to have the right skill set to approach difficult conversations, because I would class that as a difficult conversation because it's a conversation that is likely, there's potential to cause upset there. And so it's a difficult conversation. The person who is having that conversation may or may not be comfortable making someone else upset. And so they haven't got that skill set to remove their own emotions from that conversation and have it. But also, um, calling for honesty sometimes is, it's really nice. For me, I would go for honesty every day, every single day, because it makes me have to remember less. I don't have to remember the lie that I told yesterday because I was just being honest. So it makes me have to remember less.
It's so
So
true. It's so true. But I have to say, over the years, I've been in situations where I've made people really sad
yes,
and I've really
it's
upset
hard.
people by
It
being
is,
honest.
yeah, it is difficult. But I think, um, we always have to, approach such conversations with compassion and with kindness as well, because people can feel the kindness that is coming from you. They can always feel it, even if they don't tell you. People can always feel that you're coming from a place of care and not just from a place of duty of, let me tick this box or let me do my job.
Mm,
So it's a bit of both, I would say. Yeah.
The trouble is when the compassion is missing.
Yes.
Or as my famous words to a lot of people is, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Absolutely. It is how you say it. And if I just come up to you and just brush off the topic like, nothing, it meant nothing to me, you will not feel great about it. But if I approach it with compassion, you would know that it's coming from a place of care.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
So I just something that I've been thinking about before we even came to the conversation. I was just thinking about like the Asian communities, the ones like friends of mine, and there's always a common, like with a lot of the British Asian friends that I have, they will often say things like, I want my child to understand my culture. Or within a household, within a family environment,
Mm,
a parent might feel another parent hasn't done enough
mm.
to teach their child about culture. Now, explain to me the dichotomy of that, because I have really struggled to explain.
Okay, so let me take for example in a typical African home. I'm African. In a typical African home, especially now in Cameroon. Let me bring it right down to Cameroon. In Cameroon, there are about 250 ethnic groups, and each
Mm,
of those ethnic groups have slight different. Let me not even say slight differences. They have differences in terms of their food, their cultural food, their cultural language, how their cultural outfit, even. And so
wow.
it's it's really difficult to have two people who are married from the same culture. That's brilliant if the two people have come from the same ethnic group, because there will be no issue of you're not doing much, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. The problem comes when you have two people from different ethnic groups, from two different ethnic groups. That is teaching, one person is teaching their culture, the other person is teaching. So you are teaching yours, I'm teaching mine. It
Mm,
could really create confusion amongst children, or in the children, because I'm teaching my dialect, you're teaching yours, and sometimes the dialects are so different that there are no words that are crossovers.
mm,
So in such a case, I think both parents still have to come together and say, okay, do we want to teach yours, or do we want to teach mine, or do we want to teach about the culture of the country as a whole, and not go into the different dialects or the different ethnic groups, because um it can really create confusion, um and it can create conflict as well, which it's something that you really want to resolve in a really in a sensible way within the home. Um, for us, we try and say we want our children to at least have an idea of our cultural background in terms of the food to start off with, always the food, and then in terms of the language as well. We communicate to our children in in our cultural language. They understand the basics like good morning, like how are you, shut the door, come here, can you pass me your shoes, and those little um introductory part of the language. But I suppose it still comes back down to the parents to say, okay, what do we really want to pass on to the children? And also, culture is not just about where we've come from, it's how we do things as well. What
mm,
When I talk about, like, I often talk about culture in my classroom. The culture in my classroom is a culture of respect. That is it. That's it's that we're not negotiating about that. And culture within the home could be that culture of where we come from, but also it could be our beliefs within the home. What do we believe in? It could be, yes, we want to build an atmosphere of respect. That is still culture, isn't it?
And these days, everyone being on their phones, even when they're eating, and even when they're in the same room, is also part of the culture,
It
because
is, yeah,
you are
absolutely.
together, yet you're not there for each other.
Yeah, you're not there. And it could be, okay, the culture within this home is, I'm sorry, no phones on the dinner table. That is culture. And that can be passed on now from one generation to another. And that will be the culture within that family that maybe started with generation X or whatever, and then
Mm.
it permeated to the rest of the generations. So we can actually really create culture within our homes. And if there is a situation where both parents are not from the same cultural background, as in cultural heritage, then they can create a culture within that home.
Well, what if the parent doesn't even realize that the culture within the home is something they created?
Okay, then maybe there's a conversation there still to be had. And we have worked at Eden, we have worked with parents to support that change in culture within the home. And the culture within that home was a very antagonistic culture where everyone is shouting over everyone. And that means it's one, really loud, two, it's a very anxious, tense atmosphere, and there's no harmony. And we went in there, and the idea was to get that culture to one, build harmony. That was the word we used throughout. We want to create harmony. What can we do as a unit, as not just as one person, not pointing fingers, but what can we do as a unit within this home, children and parents together, to
Hmm.
create the harmony that we want, to create the calm that we want, to create the respect that we want. And I suppose it's when we approach it from a holistic point of view like that, we involve everybody.
Hmm.
And so children would say, well, mom, I don't like it when you shout. And it still comes back down to that open and honest conversation and being open to receive it as well, even if it's not sounding very good at that point in time. I don't like it when you shout. When you shout, it makes me anxious. Straight away, my wall is built.
Hmm.
I want to fight back because that child is a teen. If that child is a teenager, they are going to want to fight back immediately. So I suppose it's still open and honest conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Open and honest. And what if, I think the thing I was getting at is there's no manual.
No, there
So
isn't.
as a parent, we just carry on doing, and then one day we look back and we say, I don't like that my child doesn't know about my culture. I don't like that my child, but actually, the whole time you had the power, you had the influence, you could have used. Um, so, like, also that differentiation between saying and doing.
Mm,
If you are a parent who very much values, or the British identity side of
yes,
things, and you're doing everything that is like aligned to that,
yes,
then you tell your child, no, 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 you must do it the Pakistani way or the Indian way or the Bengali way.
yeah.
But actually, like, the child is only doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. They do learn from looking at us, from seeing what we do. They don't learn from a lot from doing what we say. From what we say, they learn a lot more from observing and making creating their identity out of the model that we have built for them. And
Yeah.
so I quite like the fact that you use the word influence. As parents have a lot of influence in terms of what culture they want to create within that home. And they have to model that culture for the children to then be able to see that template and copy that template. But if
Mm.
there's whatever template that we're putting down, that is the same template that the children are going to be copying as parents. So
Yeah, and reading a book doesn't make you an expert about anything. You have to live it. You have to live through it. I mean,
yeah,
I didn't have a manual. I had to learn parenting, and I'm still learning it, even
same.
though the children are 18 and 23. And
Yeah.
it's the same with leadership. Every job I've been in, I'm learning. I'm growing and I'm learning. But again, like, sometimes, like, a long time ago, I understood that actually I do have power, and that's influence.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
Power to influence, because if you don't know that in your role as a leader, whatever you might inherit,
Mm.
actually change starts with you.
Yeah.
And similarly within the work home, I talk to parents and they're like, oh, but I can't because it's always been done this way. But who decided it continues that way? You did.
Who did? Who said it has to continue that way? And I suppose it comes back to change, doesn't it? Just like in leadership, change is very nuanced, and sometimes it takes someone some time to kind of adapt to the idea of change in their minds first before
Mm,
they can then walk the change walk. So even for parents as well, changing from what you've always done, even if it's not working, at least it's familiar.
mm, mm,
It's
mm.
what we've always done, is familiar. I know it like the back of my hand. So let's just keep doing it, even if it's not working. But it does take courage to say, okay, this is not working. Let's change it and let's do it some other way, even if we don't know if the other way is going to work.
Yeah. What I find really uncomfortable is where you meet a young person and the parent says they are XYZ, or, useless or lazy or whatever. And
Mm,
then you work out after some time they are a direct result of what is going on in their lives. How do you, that I find really, really uncomfortable, because sometimes I think in youth work, I felt like there isn't really much I can do, because
mm,
the young person's with us maybe for a few hours once a week or twice a week. And
yes.
the rest of the time, they're going back to that environment.
Mm. And it's the same. It's sad, it's really sad, and it's the same in schools as well. Even though in schools the young people spend a lot of time within the school, as opposed to youth workers where it's not as much, contact time. But I do find that sometimes I'm on the phone to the parent and saying, such and such happened, so and so, they're doing this, that, and the other. And during that conversation, for example, we have to call parents if a child directly swears at you.
Mm,
uh, During that conversation, the parent is directly swearing at the child and asking them, why have you sworn at your teacher?
mm,
you know in that instance, I empathize with the child, because that is what they know, that is the environment in which they've grown in. And it's really difficult to then change that for the child when every single day they're exposed to that.
mm, mm. That's their norm.
Yes, absolutely.
So you can't educate, or you can't suggest anything alternative when they are used to that norm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's very, very tricky, and that is hard work. So I am going to ask you quickly, Ivy, share
Yes.
with us any forthcoming workshops and things people can get involved in, because I think what you do is amazing in
Thank you.
terms of working with parents.
Okay, so we have got a workshop coming up. It's a face-to-face one this time around. Last Saturday we had a parenting workshop which was online. On the 3rd of June, in Bristol. Is going to be happening in Bristol, UK. If you are around Bristol or you can make your way to Bristol, we would love to have you. The details will be coming out soon, but we've got a confident parenting workshop which is coming up on the 3rd of June, as from 10. It's a Saturday as well, from 10 a.m. So that's what we've got in the pipeline.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much for today. I'm going to wrap up. Do you have anything else you want to add about culture in general,
Um,
leadership?
One thing I want to add, and I'll just tie this to kind of parenting. First of all, parents are the first, like parents are leaders, to be honest. Everyone is a leader, because you're either leading someone or you're leading yourself. And if you're leading someone, then you're a leader to that person. If you're leading yourself, then you're a self leader. So parents are leaders of their children or the children in their care, but they are also self leading. And the one thing that I really want to talk about culture is, we get to create, as parents, we get to create the culture that we want within that home. You determine what culture you want within that home, and that culture is going to impact every single aspect of your child's life, be it outside of the home, be it 10 years later when they've got a job and they're working somewhere else, be it 20 years later when they're in a relationship with their partner. It is going to create, it's going to impact that child's life. So what I often say is, culture that we're creating is for today and for the future. So that's where I'm going to end.
Thank you. That's a wonderful note to end on. Thank you very much, Ivy. People can get hold of you via LinkedIn, right?
Yes. You can get hold of me via LinkedIn, or you can get hold of me via other social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity, Ivy. And goodbye to everybody who has joined us today. I hope you find the conversation we've had insightful and helpful. Give us any feedback. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.